Good evening and welcome to tonight's event. First of all, thank you to Joe Naulaerts for being here tonight. We kind of convinced him to come here because he's given this presentation in Swakopmund already, and we thought it might be a nice idea that the Windhoekers can also learn something about our skill pikeys. So thank you for coming and making the time to actually be here tonight. And then I think you should rather introduce yourself. It's because I don't do very well introducing other people. I can, however, say that he's got over a decade of experience in marine science and conservation. And he now told me that he's not just working on turtles, but also on other species as well. So it might be an interesting guy for the future. So I think you're not going to be here for the last time.
Thank you so much for your introduction, and thank you everyone for joining me tonight here for the talk about turtles in Namibia. Really appreciate taking the time to come here. So, like I was said, my name is Joe. It's actually Joachim Naulaerts, but it can be a bit tricky to pronounce, so Joe is just easier. Please feel free to call me Joe. And we're here tonight to talk about sea turtles in Namibia. Now, I know that actually a lot of people aren't even aware that we have sea turtles in Namibia. So it is a very engaging topic, and I think for a lot of people a new topic because of that. I just want to quickly go over, the people who fund this project actually. So I work for the Namibian Nature Foundation as a technical advisor for any coastal and marine research. So like it was said, I work on various projects, so different topics. And this specific research component falls under the Blue Benguela Partnership, which is an initiative that is funded by the Blue Nature Alliance and the Nature Conservancy. And it spans South Africa, Namibia, and Angola. And this project also kind of falls within the bigger project called NIMPA Plus, which has, like you can see here, a whole lot of project partners, and NNF is one of the implementing partners here in Namibia. So yeah, without further ado, I think we're just gonna jump into the presentation. Let me find the pointer here. It's okay, we can fix it here. There we go. Okay, I think it's gonna work now. Yeah, there we go. So like I said, a lot of people don't really put Namibia and sea turtles together. So I just want to feel the crowd here and see who knows how many species of sea turtles we actually have in the Namibian waters. Does anybody want to take a guess? Just pop up your hand and go for it. There in the back, say 2. Oh, we got one gentleman there saying 5, and indeed, it is 5. I don't know, maybe he saw it earlier when we were going through the slides quickly. But yeah, we have 5 different species in Namibia. Also, just if you have a question, please just raise your hand. Don't have to wait until the end of the presentation. I would like to be this as interactive as possible. Yeah, so if you have a question, just pop up your hand and then we can address the question. So yeah, we have 5 species of sea turtles within our waters. We did some research last year and beginning of this year. And I'm just giving you a couple of stats to build on further into the presentation. So we had over 2,000 turtle observations at the Kunene River mouth. And we had 10 mating events, which was quite extraordinary. So why turtles and why Namibia? Turtles have been around for over 100 million years. They have survived the dinosaurs, they have survived mass extinction, but in a couple of human generations, most of the species are actually under threat. So it's a good thing to think about. 100 million years on this planet, and now only in the last, let's say, 100 years, they are really struggling. And this is because of fisheries, bycatch, pollution, habitat destruction. There's a lot of different factors that play a role in here. These are the 5 species here that we have in our waters. So you can see the IUCN Red List, which kind of give you an idea globally what status this species is in. So all the 5 species that we have, well, 4 of them are actually either vulnerable or critically endangered. You know, so they're in the danger zone. Now the green turtles, they have been recently downlisted to least concern, which is good, you know, it's a win for conservationists. But we also have to remember this is a global assessment. So that means worldwide, the numbers of green turtles are rising, which is really good, but it doesn't mean per se that your local population is doing well, because they might be affected by certain factors that are only here locally and not globally. So that number and that assessment, always you have to think about it. This is global. Doesn't mean the turtles here are doing well. Hopefully they are doing well, but we don't really know. The knowledge gap, like I said, we don't really know. We don't really know much about turtles in Namibia at all. You know, they've kind of fallen between the cracks. You know, are they a responsibility of the Ministry of Fisheries? Are they a responsibility of the Ministry of Environment? You know, they come on land, they are in the water. It's not a commercial species, so it's kind of down on the list of priorities. So there's not a lot known about turtles, which is exciting because there's a lot out there for us to research on. But it's also a bit scary because we don't know what are the threats, how much are they being affected by fisheries? Is there a lot of bycatch? We don't know all these things. So that's what we're trying to do now, slowly addressing all these knowledge gaps so that we can come with a better picture and better understanding of the sea turtles in Namibia. And then the third one is like the Benguela mystery. Like if we think sea turtles, generally we think, oh, white sandy beaches, tropical places, you dive in, you snorkel, you can see the turtles. Now in Namibia, unfortunately, we don't have those kind of waters, but we do still have turtles. And that kind of people not knowing or that disconnect is because we don't see them generally. You know, the research we did is at the Kunene River mouth, which is very remote. When you go to the coast, it's very unlikely that you will see from the beach that you will see a turtle. You know, you do get, when you're in Walfish Bay, you go on one of the tours, you know, on the catamarans, you might spot a turtle. But it's not very common. So that's why a lot of people don't even know that we have sea turtles in our waters. So the 5 species, like I said, I'll just kind of give a quick overview of them. So we have the green turtle, which is the star of our talk tonight. It's mostly herbivore, seagrass, and algae. Like I said, least concern, but again, the asterisk there globally. I will talk about the research that we did with the confirmed aggregation and over 2,000 observations. Then the leatherback turtle, which is the biggest sea turtle that we have. They can weigh up to 700 kilogram, so they're massive. They're really massive. And what sets them apart is that they're only species that don't have a hard shell. They don't have a hard carapace. So it's quite leathery, it's a bit flexible, which allows them to dive to very deep depths over 1,000 meters. So they mostly feed on jellyfish. They are vulnerable on the IUCN list. And we definitely get them in our waters. They come to the Benguela current to feed mostly on jellyfish. And with our oceans becoming more and more, what they say, jellified, you know, I guess it's a good thing for the leatherback, not so much for most other species. But we do find them off Naulaerts as well. There is quite a few confirmed turtles recorded stranded on the Skeleton Coast, but also closer to Swakopmund and Walfish Bay. Then we have the loggerhead, which is a carnivore. The name comes from the very kind of strong head, very strong jaws. They mostly feed on shellfish, crabs, anything that they can find. They have nesting sites in South Africa, and through satellite tagging, we see that they also come to the Namibian waters to feed. Then the hawksbill. Hawksbill is very much a reef-associated species, so they mostly feed on sponge, which kind of sets them apart from a lot of animals because sponge is very hard to digest. They are they're very important in terms of reef maintenance, construction. the health of the reef, mostly associated for us with Angola because of the more tropical waters there, but we do get them in our waters when they kind of drift a bit away from their more tropical environment. Critically endangered, so they're in a very bad spot at the moment. And then we have olive ridley, the last one. It's an omnivore, so it kind of feeds on anything it gets its flippers on. It's vulnerable, and Angola actually has the largest, what they call non-aribada nesting sites. So non-aribada, you have aribada nesting, which is, it comes from the Spanish word arrive, aribada, where you have this phenomenon where basically hundreds, thousands of female turtles will nest simultaneously. So they all come together. There's sites where you have up to 500,000 turtles coming onto the beaches over a period of a couple of days, where they all nest together. And it's a strategy, it's a strategy, you're kind of overwhelming any predators that feed on the eggs or that feed on the hatchlings, because there are so many. So you know that some will survive. Here, there's a non-aribada nesting site, so they just come independently. But they do have the largest non-aribada nesting site in the Atlantic. So it's a very important site. We definitely have them in our waters. To what extent, we don't really know, because we don't have the data on it. But being a pelagic omnivore, they will definitely come and feed in our waters as well. Now, the Kunene River mouth. So where the ocean or the river meets the sea, I don't know if people have been to the Kunene River mouth, but it sits at the remote Namibia and Angola border. So the river is kind of the border between Namibia and Angola. It's one of the least studied areas in Namibia or in southern Africa, the coastal system, sorry. So you have warm fresh water coming from the Angolan highlands, coming into the ocean and meeting the cold Benguela current. So this creates a very unique microhabitat because of the difference in temperature, salinity of these different currents and different water bodies meeting each other. Now in November last year, the NNF conducted the first kind of systematic survey at the Kunene River mouth. Now, the title of the slide is Discovery, which is it's not very true. We knew because of previous observations that turtles do aggregate there, but it was never properly studied. There was never an actual systematic survey to see, okay, how many, why are they there? Are they there whole year round? There's a lot of questions around it. So in 2015, there was a very short survey, like a 3-day survey. Then in 2020, we had a first confirmed nesting on our Angolan, on our Namibian side. But never really anything proper. So we went in November, we did the first systematic survey, and what we found was quite astonishing. If you look at the numbers, so in just a span of 21 days, we had over 2,000 turtle surfacing events, we call it, because the water is very muddy. The river water is very muddy, so you can't actually see much. The only time you see something is when the head pops up to breed, and that's when you count your turtle. But you can't be sure that you're not counting the same turtle twice, because you can't identify, single turtles. So rather than saying in absolute numbers, oh, we saw over 2,000 individuals, we didn't, we don't know, So you say surfacing events, it's an index of like a relative abundance rather than absolute abundance. The survey was for 21 days. We're kind of hoping to do it over a period of 3 months, but logistically, it is really not an easy place to get to be for a long time. You have fuel to think about. I don't know if anyone in the room has ever been to the Kunene River mouth. Yeah, we have a couple here, so you know what I'm talking about. It's not easy. It's a long trip there. There is the last place to fuel up is Henties Bay. So you have to take all your fuel with. So it was a bit tricky for us. So we had to cut it short because we ran out of fuel at some point. Surfacing events, and then I think the most important thing for us was those 10 mating events. We weren't expecting that. So we had 10 distinct mating events, which kind of shows that the turtles are not there just to feed or passing through, but they're actually reproducing there. They're not nesting, but they are reproducing. They are mating, and then they're moving off to their nesting grounds. We clearly saw there is an association with the tidal cycle as well in terms of the number, but I'll get into that just now. Just want to zoom into the study area. So the Kunene River mouth, you can see water is coming from the northeast, from the Angolan highlands. Water runs down into the ocean. All around it, it's a hyper-arid, the Namib Desert, very, very little rainfall. But the river mouth creates a wetland of about 500 hectares. It's quite an important wetland for birds, not so much as Walvispe Lagoon, etc. But it's still a very important site for birds. It's one of the 2 perennial rivers that we have in Namibia, which means it's a river that flows whole year round. So we have this one bordering with Angola, and then we have the Orange River bordering with South Africa. It's a very dynamic river mouth. So if you can see, the extent of the mouth is about 3 kilometers wide. And it keeps changing. It's very dynamic because it depends on the water flow from the river. When the rain comes down and the river really flows, it will break through those sand bars that you have here, those sandbanks. It will just literally go straight. So normally it curves off northwards because of the current here as well. The Benguela current is going that way. It's pushing sand here, making that sandbank. But then when the river comes through, it can just break through. So the river is always changing. So for us, that was also hard because it depends on how the river is flowing, where we can actually access and where we can look for the turtles. So when we were there, this sandbank here actually had a channel running through here. So we couldn't go to the end of this sandbank. So we were here, and that's where we had to do our survey, because we couldn't go through the water. It wasn't very deep, the channel, but there's crocodiles and other things, so we didn't want to risk it. So, like I said, it's influenced by that Benguela current, the upwelling, and therefore it has got a lot of high marine productivity. Next is the oceanographic context. So we have this Angola-Benguela front. Now, what is that? So, like I said, we have 2 currents. We have one here, our Benguela current, coming from the south, going up north. This is cold water coming from the Southern Ocean. The water temperature is 14 to 18 degrees, very cold, but a lot of nutrients because of that upwelling. So there is basically nutrients being pushed up from the deep and then taken into that current. And that runs all along, Southern Africa, Namibia. And that's why, our ocean is so fertile, I would say. There's so much biodiversity. There's a lot of fish because there's a lot of food. Now you have that current from Angola, the Angola current, which is coming from the tropics. It's going north, it's going south. It's coming from the north, it's going south. This is warm water, 26 to 28 degrees, very warm water, but very low on nutrients. Now these 2 currents are colliding. They're meeting each other, and they're creating this very dynamic, but also very exceptional environment, which is called the Angola-Benguela front. Now it kind of sits between 15 and 17 degrees south, but it moves. It moves depending on the strength of the currents. Other events like El Nino and things like that all have an effect on it. So that front kind of moves, but the Kunene River sits just here at that kind of southern border of that front. And that's probably one of the reasons why the turtles tend to aggregate here, because it's such a unique environment. You have very steep gradients that change over quite a short distance. In that front, from one spot to another, the temperature can change from 8 to 10 degrees. So it can drop 8 or 10 degrees, or it can go up depending on what side you're coming from. But it's not only the temperature, the salinity changes, then you have the fresh water coming in. So it's a very unique environment So they have the warm water from the Angola current. Being reptiles, cold-blooded, they need to have a certain temperature to be comfortable. And then they have the cold Benguela current providing all the food. So it's a perfect kind of situation for them. Now, looking at the conservation context, we as Namibia are also part of international agreements. And one of them, we have a commitment, there's a target, 30 by 30. I'm assuming that some of you, maybe even most of you have heard of that. What we're aiming for is by 2030 to protect 30% of our terrestrial environment. This is on land, our inland waters, but also our marine environment. Now, Namibia is doing really, really well on the terrestrial environment. But unfortunately, we're very much lagging behind on the marine side. We have one protected area, marine protected area at the moment. It is big though, it's the second largest, if I'm not mistaken, it's the second largest in Southern Africa, which is great, but it still only covers 1.7% of our EEZ. So our EEZ is our exclusive economic zone, which runs from the land 200 nautical miles into the water. So that body of water is ours. We decide who can come and fish there, etc., etc. But we're only protecting 1.7% of it at the moment. So we need to catch up. 2030 is around the corner. Anybody actually knows what the name is of the one marine protected area that we have? I mentioned it early in the beginning because it's actually the name of one of the projects. Yes, NIMPA indeed. So it stands for the Namibian Islands Marine Protected Area. So, that is a topic for another time. But yeah, it's here. So this is our marine protected area, close to Naulaerts. But you see all these other green areas on the map. Now these are EPSAs. Now what are EPSAs? So EPSAs are ecologically or biologically significant marine areas. They were designated under the UN Convention on Biological Diversity because they classify under certain specific conditions. Either they're unique in their ecosystem, in their environment, or they have very high biodiversity. There's a whole set of rules for you to be able to be an EPSA. Now we have several in our EEZ, but the EPSAs, they don't really give you any legal protection. It kind of just shows that this is a very important area, for conservation, for, management, for international kind of commitments. These are important areas, but at the moment they're not. There's no legal protection really for them. So that's why under the NIMPA Plus, that's where the plus comes from. It's extending that network of marine protected areas. We have the one, we want to extend it. Okay, where should we look now? Well, we have some perfect candidates here with our EPSAs. So under the Blue Benguela Partnership, we are specifically looking at Cape Freya here and then the Namib. So the Namib is basically a transboundary EPSA. So a small part of it is on the Namibian side, a bigger part of it is on the Angolan side. And that's where the Kunene River mouth kind of sits in that EPSA. Now, why is this important? Well, doing this research, getting that data, your observations of your numbers of turtles, your mating events, collecting all of this, it kind of justifies the fact, that this is an EPSA, but it also helps us support and get that evidence to find the support to make this maybe into a new protected area, or at least, have the evidence to show that we need some kind of spatial protection for this site, because it is an important site for the green turtles nationally, but also regionally. How did we study the turtles? I'm talking here and then giving you the presentation, but unfortunately, I wasn't actually the one spending 21 days there. So we had a researcher who was there for that period, who basically did a point count survey, very basic, very straightforward, binoculars. You find yourself a point where you want to stand, and that's where you count. And then you just do that over and over and over again. So we had 6 counts every day, one at high tide, one at low tide, and then an hour before and an hour after each of the high tide and the low tide. So 6 surveys each day for 21 days in a row, totals 126 hours of watching, hoping that you see a turtle head pop out. Then, of course, we're looking at behavior. Is there any predation on the turtles? We had the mating events, which was amazing. We really didn't expect that. But any kind of behavior will be noted down, location, date, time, etc. We also divided we had the view of the river, and we divided it into 3 strata. So we had the channel, which I explained to you, where the river was kind of cutting through the sandbank. So it wasn't actually the mouth. The mouth was further. We couldn't reach to the mouth, so we were bound by that channel. So we had the channel, then we kind of had the river center point, and then we had an area a bit further, which we call the white sandbank. So each segment was counted individually, and then repeated again and again and again. And then, very exciting as well, actually, in February of this year, we went back and we joined MEFT, and we put 2 satellite tags out on the green turtles, because it's great to know that they're there, but we also want to know why are they there and where do they go afterwards. And the only way to do that really is by deploying satellite tags on the turtles. And this is the first time any sea turtle has been tagged in Namibia. Oh. Just to give you a bit of an idea what it looks like, sometimes we romanticize field work a little bit. It's great and I love it, but it's also patience. It's sitting there for hours and hours trying to spot the turtles. Like I said, because of the water being so murky, that is really all you can see. It's just that head popping out, and you do really need your binoculars. We had a scope as well, but we found that the scope doesn't really work well when you're trying to survey an area, so the binoculars are easier. Our key findings, so what did the data reveal? And this is all just the visual survey. So in terms of the visual survey, we definitely saw that there's a tidal influence on your turtle activity. So you can see high tide is the main time for the turtles to be in the river mouth. And low tide, you have your lowest numbers, which makes sense, because, the water level also really drops with low tide in the river. So the turtles are very much restricted to kind of the center of the river, because all the other areas are not deep enough for the turtles. And then the rising and the mid tide kind of fall there in between. Then we had habitat preference. So the white sandbank seemed to be the highest number. But whether this is because it was kind of the area that was also the calmest in the river. So does that mean, was it easier for us to spot the turtles? You always kind of have to question your data. You can't just go like, okay, well, we saw most turtles there, so they must prefer that habitat. But maybe it was because we actually saw them better there than we saw them somewhere else. So those things are very important just to keep in mind when you're analyzing your data. Then, like I said, these 10 confirmed mating events, which shows that it's not just a feeding habitat, but it may function as an important seasonal reproductive habitat, but we still need to go more often. We have a little snapshot now, and you can start thinking about what that means, but we need more data to really confirm if it's actually a seasonal reproductive habitat. And then the kind of unexpected density, we knew that turtles were there, but not in those kind of numbers. We didn't really expect that. So even though we're not talking about absolute numbers, but more about surfacing events, it still gives you an indication that, there are a lot of turtles there. Now the question is why? Why do they go there? Yeah, we talked about, the Benguela front, but why do they go in the river? Because that is still a question that we don't really know. The river water is warmer, so it can be because of, it's a better environment for them to be, they warm up a bit, they go back in the ocean, start feeding in the cold Benguela current. Maybe it's because they have certain parasites. They go into the freshwater, try to get rid of those parasites. There's a lot of questions that we don't really know, because from what I understand, in terms of feeding in the river mouth, there isn't much to feed on. These are herbivores. There's no seagrass. There's very little algae. I haven't been able to confirm that, like I said, crocodiles. But, hopefully at some point we can take samples of the riverbed. We can find out what exactly is there. But from communication with other people that have done research there, it seems to be very little. So the question still is there, like why? Why do they go there? Is it just to mate? Is it a better environment for them to mate than out in the ocean? I'm not entirely sure. Now, following the turtles across the ocean. So how does it work? We basically put a satellite tag. It's a bit bigger than this, maybe about the size of my phone, a bit bulkier, but not that big. And it just basically gets attached to the turtle's carapace. We use marine grade epoxy, and you just glue it on. It only takes about 15 minutes to half an hour for the whole process. You get the turtle, we put the tag on, let it dry out a bit, the epoxy, and then put it back in the water. Now, how it works is basically every time that the turtle surfaces to breed, the tag will send out a signal, the satellites will pick it up, and it will give us a location of that turtle. So every time it pops up, we get a location. And then based on that, hopefully we'll be able to see, okay, where do they go? So I have a question there. How do we get the turtles? Or yes, that's a good question. So unfortunately, we didn't really have the resources or the logistics to have a boat and a net, because that would be the preferred option. You go into the river mouth, you basically drop a net around the turtles, and you drag them out to the beach, and you deploy the tag. What happened for us is basically there is some fishing happening at the Kunene River mouth as well. And from speaking to them, we know that sometimes they get foul hooked, the turtles. The hook gets attached to the carapace, or when they swim through, when the lines are out, they swim through the line, they can feel it's a turtle. So actually these two turtles were caught by line. So they were reeled in, and then we deployed the tag. So because of the turtle activity there, it can be a bit of a concern. But from my understanding of speaking with the fishermen that go there, they can feel when it's a turtle on the line. So what they do is either they don't pull, so the turtle can just kind of get away. If it still gets stuck in the line, they will try to reel it in and then cut the line as close as they can to prevent any entanglement. Because it is an issue, it is a threat for them, the bycatch, also by recreational fishing. So yeah, that's how we got our two turtles. Then we deployed the tag on it. We had a whole group there, somebody from African Wildlife Tracking, Martin, who actually put the tag on together with a professor from South Africa as well. We had a vet with us who took some blood samples. So we really tried to get all the information that we could, because you are putting that animal through quite a lot of stress. So you kind of want to maximize on that moment and just take whatever you can and then put it back. And the hope is, of course, that we can, based on the satellite tags now, look at migration routes, feeding grounds, and hopefully nesting beaches. Where do they go? The assumption is that they're going to Angola, because you have nesting grounds there for the green turtles. And we're probably talking about, the same population here, the Angolan and the Namibian population. But we will only know when we see the data that comes back. Because the Angolans are also doing research at the Kunene River. So they're looking at the same turtles. So we're really trying to work together here, because we're really aiming for the same thing here, is conserving these turtles. So just to show you how it was in action, these turtles are heavy. I was surprised by that too. So bringing them back to the water, picking them up is not. You do need 4 people to do it safely. But the process itself is really straightforward. It goes really quickly. You just clean the shell, put the epoxy on, stick the tag on, let it dry. The tag itself has paint on it as well to stop any organisms growing on the tag that can then interfere with your transmissions. And this is just a picture showing you some of the tracks of one of the turtles. So it's from its deployment until last activity. This is the 1st of June. So it's a couple of months, and you can see that the turtle really sticks around the river mouth. We can hardly see the river mouth with all the dots on it, but the river mouth is here. So the turtle hasn't gone anywhere really, which again gives us evidence that this is not just them passing through this area. They are really spending quite a lot of time there. So it must be an important place for them. The reasons why is still kind of need to be answered. You know, we have suspicions, but we need more data about that. You can see a couple of the tracks are going inland, you know, and with my previous talk in Swakop, people asking, oh, were they nesting? No, unfortunately not. But this happens sometimes because the surfacing time can be very quick as well. Not always, the data doesn't always, or the pings doesn't always reach the satellites properly, or sometimes there's interference in the atmosphere. There's many things that kind of make these errors. You know, I mean, it can also be that, yes, your turtle is dead. It's on the beach now. You know, it's stranded, but then you wouldn't see any points moving after that. I've tagged tuna before where suddenly, you know, the tag is on land and you try to find it and you end up with a fisherman at his door and he's got the tag at home, you know. So all these things happen, but here, some of these errors, that's completely normal. When they do the analysis, they will be outside of that analysis. They won't be taken into account. Yes, sorry. For them, for the pings? So every time they breach, every time they take a breath, every time they come out of the water, but you have a maximum amount of pings that your device can send in one day. So there is a limit to the amount of pings it can send. I'm not entirely sure how many, but that was one of the worries, because when you deploy it and the turtle goes into the fresh water, it can mess with the sensors, because the sensors are kind of set for salt water. You know, and one of the issues that can be is that for some reason it sends all the pings for that day in one go when it's in the fresh water, and then it will mess up, you know, your locations, of course. We haven't seen that here, but yeah, I mean, look, satellite tags have been used for a very long time, and they have really progressed like any technology. You know, they are a lot better than they used to be, but you still have faults and mistakes happening. But generally, as long as you have a good connection with the manufacturer, they're always very helpful. Sometimes they will even send you a new tag if, you know, for some reason this one came off early or had a fault for some kind of reason. So what's next is kind of, like I said, is hoping to see them actually move, you know, somewhere else then. I mean, it's great that they're sticking around, because this is evidence that, look, this site is important, but now we want to know where they actually go afterwards. Now, some of the threats, and I think this is quite an important slide. Like I mentioned before, you know, 100 million years of turtles, and now they're in a dire strait. So the main one is fisheries bycatch. You know, fisheries bycatch globally is the biggest killer of sea turtles. This is mostly in your long lines, your trawls. You know, long lines, you'll more see, you know, turtles that are carnivores that will go for the bait on the hooks. You know, in your trawls, you get the other species. But yeah, bycatch is a really big issue. And the problem in Namibia, we don't know if we have a problem. And that's the problem, because there's no data. There's no data in terms of bycatch of turtles. You know, so that is really something that we're trying to address as well, together with the Ministry of Fisheries. Only last week we had a training with the fisheries observers, or the trainee fisheries observers, where we go through turtle identification and what to do when they have a turtle bycatch. if it's alive, how they can put it back in the water, etc., handling of the turtle. So it's a really important one because, I mean, fisheries observers, they're kind of our first line of, not defense, but, our first line of information. They're there, they see what's happening. If they just take pictures and measure, then we know what species, we know, okay, is it a juvenile, is it an adult, where was it? Then we can start looking at heat maps. Okay, this is where most of the bycatch is happening. Why is that? Is that like in a migration route? Okay, so how can we mitigate that? Can we talk to the fishery sector and see, okay, maybe seasonal closure or a spatial closure? There's a lot of things that we can do if we have the data, which we don't at the moment. Then pollution. Pollution is another big one. Maybe not so much here in terms of plastic, marine litter, because we're such a, not a small, we're a big country, but we have a small population. I've worked in Southeast Asia where the beaches are just covered, covered in plastic. And a lot of turtles will eat plastic by accident, either mistaking it for prey or just being curious. And it will block their digestive system. And what happens is they build up gas inside. So it's like a balloon blowing up inside them. And then they become positively buoyant, which means they can't dive anymore. They can't feed themselves anymore. They're very sensitive to UV light as well. So the sun is on their shell the whole day. The shell cracks. It's really horrible to see. So pollution is a big one. Plastic pollution, but also pollution from factories, etc. It all affects all animals, in the marine environment. Climate change, warming seas will alter where your prey is, will alter where your nesting beaches are. For example, I don't know if people know that, but for turtles and for a lot of other reptiles, the temperature of the nest or the sand around the nest determines the sex of the animal. So the warmer the sand, the more females you will get. So through global warming, what we're seeing is we're skewing that whole sex ratio, because you want kind of like a 50-50 male-female. Now it's like more females, more females, more females. So that will have an impact on your genetic diversity of your population as well. So all these things, have a massive impact. Then one which is a bit more local, the first three are very global, they're everywhere. The Baines Dam, so the proposed Baines hydropower dam will have an effect. I don't know to what extent, but it will have an effect because it will affect the discharge water, the volume of water that is going down. When they open the dams, then it might come down very quickly, and it will alter that environment that is so important now for the turtles. They're attracted to the environment for some reason. If you alter that environment, then it might stop them or prevent them from coming there. And then, like I've mentioned before, is that knowledge gap itself. We can only protect what we know and understand. So it's very hard to, if you don't have enough data, or even to justify to your funders or the ministry, why is this important? We need to be able to show why it is important. So getting that data, getting that baseline is very important. Sorry for the quite graphic images, but just to show you that bycatch is real. These are pictures just across our border, in Angola. So this is in northern Angola, very close to southern Angola, sorry, very close to us, where these turtles were found on the beach. And what happens is, they get caught generally in like gill nets, etc. And to prevent damage to the nets, the fishermen will just cut the head off instead of trying to, take the turtle out alive. They'll cut the head off, get rid of it so it doesn't damage the net. So it's a big problem. We will have bycatch in Namibia as well. Maybe not this kind of graphic thing, but it's natural in any kind of fisheries that will happen. But we just need to understand how often, where, and how can we possibly mitigate some of it. Now this is very much still a dream. It's my dream. It's in a concept stage where I would very much like to have a proper program, and not just on green turtles. The focus on this talk was very much on green turtles. We have 4 other species in our waters. Now, unfortunately, we don't have nesting beaches, which makes it a lot harder to study this animal. You know, South Africa, Angola, they have nesting beaches. It's easy. You pop a tag on a female that is laying her eggs, you know, no problem. So for us, it's a bit harder. So I have the concept node. It's different phases. We've done phase 1 where we kind of established that a bit of baseline. It's not yet a baseline because it's very much a snapshot. You know, we need to know during the rest of the year, are the turtles still there? Are they only seasonally there? What numbers? But that was our first step, you know. We do the survey, the visual survey. We've put out 2 satellite tags. We're collecting that data. It's coming in. Now, the second phase, which is still funded by the Blue Benguela partnership, is I would very much like to do drone surveys because, like I said, we were restricted. You're there with your binoculars. There is a channel now preventing me to go further to the river mouth. So if we have a drone, it will make it a lot easier. We can see a lot more, and we can also be more detailed or more accurate about, okay, I see a turtle there and turtle there. Now you see a turtle there, and then one pops up there, and you're like, oh, is it the same turtle or not? You know, so drones will definitely help with that. And then doing that across the different seasons, so we get a picture over the whole year. We have some funding to put an additional 2, maybe 3 tags out, and we can do that at different times of the year, so that we also have more spread in terms of time, and then we might see differences in terms of how they migrate. And then kind of working together with the people that are there. So the Kunene River mouth is very isolated, but there is small-scale diamond mining. There's people at the mine year-round. There is, you know, tourists that go there. So they have tour operators. There's a concession area there. So if we work together with these people and get information from them in terms of what they see, you know, that is also very, you know, citizen science is very important, you know, and can be very helpful because unfortunately we don't have the money and the time to be there all the time. And then the third phase is the concept node, but that is very much, you know, funding dependent. You know, generally that's what it comes down to, is, you know, finding the money to do the research that you want to do. So what I would like to do is have full surveys for all 5 species across the whole Namibian coastline, having that bycatch, you know, the fisheries observers looking at the bycatch of turtles, having that really embedded into the Ministry of Fisheries, you know, that this is a standard thing that they look for. The collaboration with Angola, you know, it's already happening, but it's more informal. So to formalize that, so we're working on the same kind of thing. They have a lot of experience. They've been working with turtles for a long time, so we can learn a lot from them. And then the end goal is a national management plan for the sea turtles in Namibia, you know, where monitoring happens, you know, you have the bycatch as being monitored, you have your different species and their populations being monitored, but all embedded into the ministry, because a lot of the times, you know, you have a project, you have funding for 3 years, you do all this amazing work, and then the project is finished, and then nothing happens. There's no continuation, you know. So for it to be a sustainable thing, it really has to be embedded into the ministry so they can take that on. In terms of the regional context, like I just said, we can learn a lot. We can learn a lot from Angola, you know, because they have the same 5 species, but they're actually all nesting in Angola. So they've been doing research on turtles way longer. So we can learn a lot from them, how they've done it, work closely together with them. And like I said, hopefully we can have some kind of data sharing agreement between them so we can work on the green turtles. They have recently, just a month after we put our 2 satellite tags out, they've put 8 satellite tags out on green turtles at the Kunene River. You know, so if we work together, you know, it'd be silly to do 2 separate studies looking at the same animal, probably trying to answer the same questions. And then in South Africa, yeah, you know, they have done a lot of work with turtles. They have actually one of the longest monitoring programs running on turtles in the I'm going to butcher this word, I'm sorry, Isimangaliso Wetland Park. You know, since 1963, they have been monitoring. But like I said, it's a lot easier to monitor turtles when they're nesting on your beaches, because then on a yearly basis, you can see, okay, how many turtles came nesting, and you can see the trends. You know, for us, it will be a lot harder because we have to go out there in the ocean and try to see and find them and count them. And that's why that bycatch and the observers on the boats, on the fishing boats, are such a valuable resource. Why does it matter? You know, okay, I like turtles. I think generally people find turtles a very nice marine species to look at, but it doesn't really impact your life, you know. But, you know, turtle is a very important part of the marine ecosystem. You know, it's generally with any of those bigger species or the small species, you know, look at what happened with our fisheries. You know, once you overfish one species, it's going to have a cascading effect on all the others. It's the same with the turtles. You take the turtles out, it will have an effect on your ecosystem. Then fisheries reform, you know, I would really like to have that bycatch baseline, not to go and tell fisheries like, hey, look at what you guys are doing, but work together with them. You know, okay, how can we deal with this? You know, we found a problem now. How can we deal with it together? Regional leadership, you know, if Namibia really takes this on, it can be a recognized contributor to the South Atlantic or the Southeast Atlantic conservation of turtles, you know, which gives us standing in a kind of regional context, and it will help with finding funding as well, you know, for programs like this. Habitat protection, like we mentioned before, that data that we're collecting will give us the evidence that we need, and hopefully it will be enough to then kind of go, it's like, maybe we should protect this area, you know, not just an EPSA, which doesn't have any legal grounds, but a proper either marine protected area or some other kind of protection. National capacity, you know, through this program, you know, the idea is really to involve, you know, local students to build kind of that capacity and that expertise in Namibia, so you can stay here. You know, at the moment, we don't have it because nobody's ever really done research on the sea turtles, but we can definitely build it. We can learn from our partners, we can learn from our neighbors, but we want to really make sure that it stays here. And then our global commitments, you know, our 30 by 30, you know, having this evidence helps you to then push for policy and push for government to kind of commit to what they already committed to. How can you be part of it? You know, how can anybody, any regular person in Namibia be part of it? You know, we can all do that. You know, of course, you guys are not at the coast, but I'm assuming a lot of you will at some point in the year be in Swakopmund or come in December and enjoy our nice weather when it's too hot here in Windhoek. But yeah, reporting any sightings. So this again goes back to also the fisheries observers, but anyone in the public as well. When you see one, report it. Try to take a picture so we can try to identify what species it is. If you're out on the beach and you go for a walk, you find a dead turtle on the beach, the same thing, you know, you take pictures of it, you notify either the Ministry of Fisheries, or you can notify Namibia Nature Foundation. We can try to find out, we can do a necropsy on the turtle to try to find out, okay, why did it die? You know, there's a lot of information that we can get from stranded turtles. Reduce your footprint is an easy one, and I think you've all heard it. No single-use plastic. You know, it's very much ingrained. You know, I'm from Europe, I'm from Belgium. It's very much ingrained already in Europe. You can't even find a plastic bag in the supermarket. Here, they still provide it. You do pay for it. So it's a win-win for you. If you bring your own bag, you're not paying for a plastic bag that you only use once. And like I mentioned, plastic bags are a big issue because definitely for the turtles that eat jellyfish, they do really resemble jellyfish when they're in the water floating. So it's a big concern. But not just, you know, the plastic bags, in terms of choosing the seafood that you eat or the tour operators that you use when you want to do a wildlife trip on the ocean. You know, you can make small changes there. You know, maybe sometimes, yes, they're a bit more expensive, but, you know, you are doing something good. And and support me, support research. You know, the program, any research, you know, it's dependent on money. Unfortunately, it costs a lot of money to drive all the way to the Kunene River mouth. Some of the equipment that we use, those satellite tags, they're like $4,000 each, you know. So their battery span is about 2 years, but it all depends on how long they actually stay on the turtle. So the marine epoxy, you know, is supposed to last, but you know, there's cases where after 3 months it drops off, after 6 months, you don't really know. So they can go for 2 years, that's the battery life. But if it pops off before that, then nothing we can really do about that. But yeah, they are really expensive. And then some of the equipment that you need, you know, like we spoke about how we caught the turtles and how I would rather like to catch the turtles using a boat and a net. You know, how do you get the boat to the Kunene River mouth? You know, this is all very costly. So we have to then try to convince our donors to fund this kind of research and explain why it is necessary. But even people like yourself, you know, can contribute with this as well, whether it is financially, whether it is by spreading awareness about, hey guys, we actually have sea turtles in our waters. You know, that's pretty cool. You know, our colleagues at NAMCOP in Luderitz, they work on African penguins. The amount of times that, you know, we talk to people and they have no idea we have African penguins in our country, and they're so close to extinction. So the raising awareness is the first step. You know, education is so important. So yeah, it's small things. It's small things that you can do to be part of this.
Is the sustainable seafood, is it regulated in any way? I mean, we're having turtle soup, so is there some kind of regulation as how many turtles?
There are you know, certain labels that, you know, fisheries can acquire. You know, they have to follow certain very strict regulations in terms of bycatch, in terms of the gear they use, etc. But then they can get a certain certification, like MSC certification, which then kind of gives the customer the knowledge that, okay, this product was caught sustainably. There's questions with that as well. You know, there's dolphin safe tuna, and then people go investigate it. Well, how dolphin safe is it actually? So, but there's a lot of information out there online. It's very easy to just go and have a Google and say, okay, what brands should I be eating if I want to be sustainable? But like I said, generally they might be a little bit more expensive, you know, and then it's up to you. Am I able to do that? And, you know, not everyone is able to do that, and we understand that. It's like I said, there's so many ways of contributing. It doesn't have to be financially. It doesn't have to be if you can't choose the seafood that you would like to eat because it's sustainable, but it might be a little bit more expensive. Well, then maybe you can do something else to be part of this. And yeah, that is me done. I would just like to thank, you know, our funders, of course, but also all the people that were involved. So Francois Thiat was our field researcher who did the visual survey for 21 days. So he was there, he survived. I mean, it's a long time to be there and very remote. So yeah, so thanks to Francois, we have all this data. And then of course, MEFT, Prof. Bester, Africa Wildlife Tracking, who were all part of the tagging expedition. And then we have Hein Truder and Leon Kraus, who are actually the concession, or Hein is a concession holder over there. And they were very helpful in terms of accommodation. We can pitch our tent in their camp and you know, and helping us getting around, etc. So yeah, thank you very much for them. And then the Kitabanga project in Angola is where we try to work closely together because we're working on the same turtles at the Kunene River mouth. So yeah, thank you so much for your time and your attention. And please, yeah, if you have any questions, I'm here.
Okay, question time. Can I just ask that everybody please wait with the question for the microphone so that the Zoomers can also hear us?
I had prepared a question, but you answered it already, which is great. But I have a new one. Is there a new EPSA out? Because I only know of the unapproved one, which is very, very old. And the second thing is, there's another thing, and I am allowed to mention this. There's another way, also without finances, that you can contribute, because there's currently a petition out. I am working for International Rivers. International Rivers has collected over 2,000 signatories by Ovahimba on the Angolan and Namibian side against the Baines Dam. We are now opening it up to everybody else to support the Himbas and show their solidarity. NNF being very much in bed with government in a lot of those projects. I might understand that you'll be shy to sign, but as an individual you can, of course, and if anyone would like to sign, please speak to me and then I'll direct you where you can sign. Thank you. So yeah, so it's about the EPSA.
Just on the petition, did I understand it correctly that it's on gathering information, on being informed?
The petition is about the right of the people to be consulted. The groups who have signed are against Baines, and that's why they're not consulted by the developers. But they have a right to be consulted. They are, of course, at the end of the day against the dam. But right now they're asking to be consulted. And that is not what is happening.
Thank you for your question. And yeah, I've seen the petition already, so I hope you get a lot of signatures. Yeah, look, I will always sign if it is about informed consent and to be part of a stakeholder engagement, for such a big project. It's super important. So I think we would definitely stand behind that. But indeed, some things are a bit tricky depending on who you work for. But as an individual, you can always stand for these kind of things. And NNF would definitely stand for, making sure that everyone is part of the stakeholder engagement. In terms of your questions about the EPSA, unfortunately, I can't really give you a good answer on that. I don't really have any knowledge of them now being renewed. I know that they're being looked at. I know that maybe my colleague here might have an answer to that.
Yeah, thanks. So actually they are at the moment tabled this week in Nairobi in Kenya. So you will have to wait until Monday to get the news where we will be standing as a country. So they are tabled this week.
I was about to say that. Anybody else?
I'll be the carrier.
Joe, you mentioned jellification just shortly, but maybe if you can provide a bit, broader knowledge on the phenomenon and the causes and the effects and so on, just for a bit more context for us landlubbers here in Windhoek.
Sorry, I didn't catch the first word you said. Jellification. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so basically what is happening, when you let's say overfish like in Namibia happened, you overfish kind of your base layer of your food chain, with the sardines. Yeah, the sardines are gone. So you're taking a big chunk out of that food chain. Now, it's going to have an effect on all the other species that are dependent on this food chain. We can see that how our seabirds are suffering from it. One of the main things that is the decline for the seabirds is the lack of prey. A lot of the top predators were very dependent on the sardines. Now you take that away, something else will fill up that space. And generally that happens in a lot of space. It's not just here, it's all over the world. Like that's why they say the oceans are being jellified, because jellyfish are just becoming more and more dominant in certain environments because they're filling a niche that has opened up because other species are gone, because either they're overfished or for some other reason they're not there anymore. And now the jellyfish can just kind of bloom, because before days they would be eaten by a lot of these species, like for example your leatherback turtle. But now with that base gone, your sardines gone, and then some of those predators also gone because of the lack of prey, now it opens up this whole space for jellyfish to kind of take over. And in a lot of oceans, that is what is happening. For some species, it's a benefit, but for the whole ecosystem as a whole, it never is a good thing.
Everybody happy? One question.
I just want to understand, you talked in the beginning about the 5 species of turtles. Are all 5 those species there by the Kunene River mouth? Or only those ones?
Well, I say no, but we don't really know. But based on their kind of home range, I would say, you have your green turtle there. You probably get your hawksbill because, their main kind of habitat is in Angola, the reef associated. So you get your hawksbills, you get your greens, you probably get your olive ridley as well, because it's an omnivore, pelagic, it kind of moves around. I would say with your leatherbacks, you might, I haven't seen them, but then I've only been to the Kunene twice. So there's a lot of unknowns. I know definitely, your leatherbacks you will see more like in the central coast and in the south. Your loggerhead also, because they're coming from South Africa, you probably see them more in the southern part of Namibia. But then again, the ocean doesn't have walls or boundaries, so these species are free to move. So we might actually get all 5 of them there, but we don't really know. Hopefully next time I come, I can tell you.
I have one last question for you. Is this presentation open for the public? So which means we're going to get your presentation, and if you would like the presentation, you can contact us and we'll send it to you. But this will also be on YouTube, as all our other Zoom presentations are, in a couple of days. Thank you very much. I will definitely contact you again for more presentation on more of these things, because just because we're the inlanders doesn't mean we don't care. And I thank you for being here, and I wish you a lovely good night.
Thank you.